First on the agenda, public comments on work session related items. Do we have anybody like to comment on tonight's work session related items? Seeing none, we'll proceed to discussion on Fab Light expansion. Mr. Taylor.
Yes, we have Steve Payne from Fab Light with us tonight, is going to talk about their company's plans for expansion. We also have two representatives from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation that's going to talk about a program that the city could institute that would help with the cost or save some money on the cost of that expansion. So Mr. Payne indicated that he wanted to start off by just talking a little bit about his company, what it does, and then talk about his expansion. So, Steve?
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm Steve Payne, president of Fab Light here in town, and I'm not too sure how familiar you folks are with Fab Light, but I just brought some of our brochures I'd like to pass around. Just give you guys a refresher on what the heck goes on at the end of Washington Street. So our business is office furniture manufacturing, and the products that we make go directly into our customers, if you will, commercial, government, higher ed, a lot of schools. So we make filing cabinet storage and related products at Fab Light. So we're buying raw steel, punching, forming, welding, powder coating, assembling, packaging, label, and shipping in our facilities. And we've been in the facility since 1996. I was here back in 1995 when we expanded into the industrial park. We built a 40,000 square foot plant back in '96, and over the decades we've continued to add equipment and add a significant amount of people to our operation here in Manistee. When we first moved from our facility over by Manistee Lake to our current facility, we had about 16 employees. We have about 92 right now in our Manistee facility. So what is causing the need for an expansion in kind of times where a lot of uncertainty of a lot of things? We've been blessed with some very good customers. We market our product on the brochures of a name called Great Openings. That is our marketing arm of the company. If you go into the website, greatopenings.com, you'll see all the different products that we manufacture. But in addition to that, we deal with some of the largest office furniture companies in the world. Steelcase is one of our largest customers, along with people like Hayworth and people like All Steel and Trendway and a number of other what we call our OEM manufacturers. So what we've done is tried to prepare for some of the business that we have been experiencing, and really the only way that we can take care of our customers is really to add some more capacity so we don't have to extend our lead times when we get into the busy season. And I brought up with me today just kind of some prints of what we're looking at doing, and not sure if okay, yeah, that's right. So this right here is our current facility. It's 200 by 200. We're looking at an expansion of an additional 200 by 200 in this area. This area is going to be our truck shipping and receiving. We're going to keep the existing shipping and receiving here as well, just to get some more additional capacity for trucks. So the addition will be going out to the north towards the water tower, and then 75 feet to the west. So it's kind of interesting, the layout looking at this. There is some topography that we had to deal with. As you're familiar with that area of town, when you pass Glucheski Road here, you start going up towards the water tower, and there's a pretty big rise there. So it caused a little bit of a challenge on where we were gonna put the addition, but it made sense to put it to the north like we're doing to minimize a lot of the excavation costs. So with this plan, it is the most reasonable in terms of construction cost, and also for our layout as well. Do have a few other drawings that I can share with you. This just kind of gives you another idea of what we're envisioning on the layout. And then just, this is the elevations of the sides of the building. So the interesting thing is the way we have it going to the north, you won't, it won't distract the view that we have right now with, you know, the clean view of the offices in the front. We'll have, on two sides of the building, we'll have windows like we do currently. We're gonna be using the same contractor who built our original building back in '95 for us. So that's why I'm here today, to kind of give you an update of what we are planning to embark upon to ultimately take care of our customers and be able to continue to manufacture product in Manistee.
One of the ways that the city could partner with Fab Light and help them with the project is adopting an industrial property tax abatement. And I'm going to let Mr. Krantz from MEDC talk a little bit about that, but we're positioned to do that because one of the things you have to do is establish an industrial development district. That's been done. That was done back in 1995, so we're halfway there. So, Bill, if you could take it from there.
Sure. Just to introduce myself, I'm Bill Kratz. I'm a business development manager with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and happy to be in front of the City Council in Manistee this evening. A little bit of background: I have been involved in economic development for many, many years, as the gray hair indicates. I was the local economic development director in Mason County for 22 years. In fact, had the pleasure of working with Steve and his father Bill Payne with Metalworks down in Ludington for several decades, starting back in 1986. So I've been with the state of Michigan now for about 13 years and cover about a 9-county region in West Michigan, and have been asked to help support the Metalworks and Fab Light expansion up in Manistee. As Thad indicated, the opportunity for the local community to consider property tax abatement for eligible manufacturers is going to be, I guess, an application that the city will be receiving from Fab Light. This is what's commonly called a PA 198 or Public Act 198 property tax abatement. It's available for eligible manufacturers in Michigan. It's the most frequently used economic development incentive in Michigan, and it's a locally controlled incentive, meaning the city council controls the use of this incentive. It's available for, as I said, eligible manufacturers like Fab Light to apply for, and it's intended to, I I guess, promote and support capital investment and job creation projects by base industry, base economic employers like FabLite. As Steve indicated, they're planning to construct about a 40,000 square foot addition onto their plant that would double the size of their footprint in Manistee. The estimated costs on that new building construction is about $3 million. The property tax abatement, if approved by the city of Manistee, would have the effect of reducing the net increased property tax liability due to that $3 million by 50% for up to 12 years. So it's, as I said, a commonly used economic development incentive, and it's locally controlled by, you know, the jurisdiction in which the project is located. It involves the city reviewing the application and scheduling a public hearing at some point in time in the future to, you know, consider that application. And if the decision is made to approve it, then you would pass a resolution of approval. The tax abatement application would then go to the Michigan Department of Treasury, and they would actually issue the certificate, or think of it as a separate property tax bill on the $3 million investment that FabLite is proposing to add to double their square footage of their plant. That property tax bill, if approved by the city, that property tax bill would be roughly about 50% of what you know, a typical property tax bill on manufacturing facilities would be for a period of years up to 12 years. And again, the city has that prerogative in making that decision. As you know, if you take a look at the numbers and what the impact is on a project like this for FabLite and the city of Manistee, a $3 million investment in new building construction will basically, and if the abatement is approved, that $3 million abatement would basically save the company roughly about $40,000 a year for, you know, up to 12 years. Recognize also that this is a 50% abatement. What that means is that all the taxing jurisdictions that levy millage in the city of Manistee at the industrial park area at this address, all those taxing jurisdictions will see increased revenues whenever a company like FabLite is making a $3 million investment, and those revenues will be roughly $40,000 a year. So the tax abatement has no impact at all on the existing taxable value that's currently there, has no impact at all on the current property taxes that are paid. It's an abatement only on the net new investment that is being proposed. And it's, again, we're trying to support and promote further investment and further job creation activities by, you know, companies like FabLite in Michigan. So that's a quick summary. Any questions that I can answer?
I have a question for Mr. Payne. Approximately how many jobs do you think this will add to FabLite?
That's a good question. If in our current rate of where we envision going out the next 3 years, we're estimating about 30.
30 jobs?
And it would be staggered in as the project gets completed, because we'll first have to build the shell, and then we'll start adding additional processes inside the expansion. So we have a timeline of the expansion being completed by around December if we start, you know, in the next month or so. So it'll be a pretty fast-paced
Yeah.
expansion plan.
I have one more question. How many people are employed now at
We
FabLite?
have about 92.
92? Okay. Well, thank you for that information. That sounds like good news.
Go ahead.
When you're talking about the 50%, is that a kind of an economic standard? Because I know that there is a flexible scale, right? And it can be anywhere from 0 to 100, am I correct? Or is it capped at 50%?
It's, the way the statutes are written, it's a 50% abatement on, and it's an abatement on real property improvements. So we're not abating the personal property.
But what already exists?
Yep. So, to answer your question, it's a roughly a 50% abatement. The flexibility is in the duration of years. You know, the law allows up to 12 years. So, does that answer your?
Yeah, and is that something that the city manager would negotiate with the applicant?
That would be a council decision on what you would like to see. You could, again, you could do it from 1 to 12 years, so whatever council is comfortable with. And I just emphasize is that, you know, if council decides to go this direction, we're not going to lose any money. We're going to gain 50% of the new investment. And then at the end of that, then we would get the 100%. So I think it's a great win-win for the community, for the city, for Fab Light. The way I look at it, if they have the courage to invest in our community, we should step up and help them make that investment.
So 1 to 12 years. That's how long we can go, right? Up to 12 years?
Yep.
Mr. Payne, how long before you think you would be at full capacity at those 30 employees?
It's a good question. You know, it's all a function of our customers and us taking care of our customers and really, the economics of the environments, which were always, unknown, but to our best guess, you know, when we get the building complete, it could take, additional couple years to get, additional processes. There's a paint line that we would be looking to put into the facility, and there's a long lead time of, building that paint line in the facility. So, 3 years is, probably a pretty fair assessment of, getting the, 30 employees into the additional 90 that we have already.
I just want to tell you where I'm coming from. I'm all in favor of giving tax abatements to help grow our economy. For you to be successful with the project, are you looking at 12 years? Are you looking at less? Well, what would be your wish for an abatement?
We've had that in the past with our building, that we put in 95 was the 12 years, and that
Okay.
that was, pretty much what we were hoping for. Although, things have changed in the whole tax laws, we're only, have the opportunity to be abated on the building portion versus our equipment that we're gonna have to put into the facility. In prior years, there was opportunities for companies to have that amount, abated, but with tax laws and changes, that has gone by. Changes.
Mr. Payne, how much of a total investment then would this project be? Is that something that you could share? I mean, if obviously 3 million is for the shell, that inside is gonna be significantly more than that.
Yeah, it'll be over 3 million to add additional state-of-the-art metal manufacturing processes, an additional paint line, and just keeping up with technology is the big thing, to be able to be competitive with the household names of the steel cases and the Herman Millers and Hayworths, some of our customers who are also our biggest our competitors as well. So, you know, we've got to invest in technology and keep ourselves in competitive position.
I'm personally very excited. I think it's a giant step forward, and I'm looking forward, and I'm sure you're anxious to get started. I kind of hear rumors that you've already been doing a little more testing and.
Yeah, we've, just making sure there's, no, hidden surprises, you know, on our grounds. We had to do those initially back in the nineties. But as everybody knows, there's a sweetening plant up, as our neighbor. And, you know, if there's ever anything that's leaching into the ground and it's on our property, then all of a sudden, even though we're not, pulling the oil, there becomes a liability on the owner. So we just need to make sure that, everything's clean.
Anybody else have any questions?
The one last thing is, if anybody would like to see our plan, I'd love to have you come up and, see our plan in
Yes.
action.
I would.
I would. I love
think,
construct.
You know, I think talking here tonight, showing stuff, showing brochures, that's just the tip of the iceberg of what, is really cool of our plan, is to see people in there working, and, some of those may be your neighbors, and, you know, we've had a lot of people that have been with us since the eighties, and, it's just great to be a part of the community and, continue to expand with, the community. You know, it doesn't take, much to see a company like we saw in Mason County this year, a company that's been there for over a half century, Harsco, get up and leave, and the owners make a decision down in South Carolina to shut down a plant. But with our company, the owners, have, set foot and remain, in this Manistee area, and this is where we wanna stay and live, and, so we wanna all grow together.
Thank you very much. Nobody else?
So I would think at this point, we just await the application, and then we'll proceed.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, discussion with Downtown Development Authority on expectations. Council, do we have any expectations of Downtown Development Authority? Do they have any expectations of us? Would you like to step to the podium and maybe talk a little bit about some of the expectations you might have?
Might just set the stage for council. This was a recommendation of the facilitator that the DDA hired to go over their strategic planning. Myself and the mayor pro tem were at that meeting, and at sometime during the meeting, she suggested that the council and the DDA board just engage in discussions about what are the expectations from each side. So that's why we're here.
What I think, we were a little, I'm not exactly sure what you want, but what we think you may want to talk about in this particular topic is the strategic planning session that was held February 13th. And that strategic planning session didn't really cover all topics that the DDA board deals with on a regular basis. We dealt mainly with how are they going to replace the director, how are they going to handle economic development in the future. And Mr. Taylor's right, there was discussion about having the city council and the DDA board meet together and talk about expectations. But I think since that time, I think you have kind of indicated what your expectation is as far as economic development goes. And the DDA board has basically said they want to wait for economic development, they want to wait until after the rising tide report comes in to decide where the downtown should be as far as economic development. So, and hopefully those two kind of meet together. I think that's fairly accurate. As you may or may not know, the DDA board this morning met in a special meeting and recommended the hiring of Caitlin Berard to be the DDA executive director. The original job description said DDA administrator, but that was probably more my mistake. I called it an administrator. It should have been executive director, but the job description that you'll receive in your packet for next week is really the same, it's just a different title. That job description does not have any economic development duties in it. I still think that person will be involved in economic development, but the actual they will mainly be responsible for keeping the office running, you know, meeting with downtown people, helping them, getting them to the right people. I think it's pretty hard to be involved in economic development, be involved as a DDA director and not be involved in economic development in some way. Because even I, at first, was told, you know, we just want you to keep the office running, but the longer I'm here, the more people need certain things, and we're trying to help them get through some of those things. So I think that's where we are right now, and hopefully there'll be a new director here. That new director doesn't have a ton of experience, but they have some economic development experience too, which I think will be helpful in the job, even though they're not hired to actually be the economic development director for the DDA. Am I making sense? So, I don't know if you have any other comments?
Please step up to the podium so we can hear you on tape. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Valerie Bergstrom. And unfortunately, I did not attend the planning session because I was under care in another state for an injury. But I think, from what I understand, this is also an opportunity for you to share what your expectations are of us, and we would welcome any feedback or direction from council.
Do you have the plan that you guys worked on in February? Is that something that you guys are going to share with us, or?
Well, it's not, from what I understand, and Sherry may be able to help, I've seen the finalized version, but it did not have a specific plan developed. It appears that a lot of the conversation was about what type of person that we should be hiring and what would meet the needs and expectations of the DDA and the downtown development community. And so we focused, when I got back, on that aspect of it, and that's how we were able to come to the conclusion to move forward with a position. Although we have tried to think of it in a very broad way. For example, we've had some experiences that tell us that sometimes, because one person's doing that job, they're sometimes doing administrative functions that really someone else might be able to do, like a part-time administrative person, for example. And so you'll see some dollars in our budget that give us the flexibility to make those kinds of decisions as we get to know if we've crafted the job description appropriately for the new person. As many of you are aware, events took up a major portion of our executive director's time in the past. And so we have eliminated some of the events in the community. But there may be other things we can do to streamline the position so that the executive director can focus on meeting the needs of the downtown community. So that's primarily what I saw the outcome of that particular document was. We do have a strategic plan that was developed last year that actually is a 3-year plan. So we are continuing to follow that direction. Thanks for the question.
I can provide that plan is available. I thought maybe I provided that, and I know that Mayor Zielinski received it because he's on the DDA board, but it probably has not been distributed completely to city council, but it can be. I can have it to you tomorrow morning.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to see it. I think the biggest thing is that
I'll email it to all of you.
just transparency, like just have open communication, and which we've been doing great with the last few months. So
Well,
I appreciate it.
well, and thank you. We welcome the opportunity to have that type of collaborative relationship too with city council.
My expectations for the DDA have not changed since the first time I put them in writing to Tom a couple months ago and talked about it at one of our work sessions, which we failed to give you the proper notice. And the first one being, I want the DDA to be completely compliant with state law by the end of the year. That's the state's deadline, and that's That's my expectation.
Mhm.
My second to that is that I want everything on the website. I don't want it in a room where somebody has to come to the city hall or some other public place to look up documents. I think it's much better, clearer, and faster, and more efficient if it is on the web, rather than putting it in a room. I know that's a choice you can make as a municipality, but it's not the choice I would prefer, and I would rather see us be on the internet.
Okay, and just to clarify, is that, I know the strategic plan is actually on the city website, under the DDA section, and the only thing that's actually on our website that is not, our minutes and our agendas are on the city website. The only other thing that's not are a few documents, which are our bylaws, and I think one other.
All of your contacts
Finance.
need to be on it as
Okay.
well.
All right.
And I think once you get Caitlin here, if
Mhm.
that's what's going to happen,
Mhm.
that's a, put everything together. I mean, the pieces are out there, you know where the pieces are, just put them together. So, oops, I see Ed raising his hand in the background.
The city's more than happy to help facilitate that. If the DDA wants to put it on the city's website, we can work with that, or if you guys want to put it on your website or both, so whatever works best, we'll allow it.
Thank you for that.
I can tell you just from my brief conversation with the person that the DDA board is recommending, compared to me, it's gonna be night and day when she comes and she's gonna be able to do a lot of things that I'm just not capable of doing when it comes to the websites and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying she's a website designer, because I don't know, I've never talked to her about any of that, but I think it's gonna be something that is gonna be a lot better than.
Right. Okay. But can she fish? I mean, we should ask. The other thing that my expectation is that you welcome Thad Taylor to your board, because we're moving in that direction. And the one bugaboo that I have, and maybe it's been corrected, the last revision I saw of your TIF plan, you still had some language in there reflecting comments about the former Washington School property. It is not in your district.
Sure, no.
That needs to be stricken.
And I know you had mentioned that to me, and I did check, and I understand that that has been removed.
Okay.
Correct, Tom?
The DDA TIF committee has been meeting with the consultant. Well, we initially met with the consultant. We initially met with the consultant and actually a lot of city staff, and I think you were present at that one first meeting that we had.
Yes.
Maybe you weren't, but.
I think
okay.
I got called in.
And I think we met a couple times. I've met with Mr. Taylor a couple times. I've sent that information off to the consultant several times. We've had several revisions of the plan. Just about every month, the DDA board receives an update saying things are moving forward with the DDA TIF, with the TIF plan, and we've made a lot of progress with it. The consultant hiring Mr. Michelangeli from Beckett Rader has really helped a lot. I was gone last week, and I know that there were some changes in that Washington school property stuff was being discussed. There were some priorities, budget priorities within the plan that had to be changed, and those were going, and the DDA TIF committee met twice, and then we relayed that off to our consultant. So right now, I know there's a plan that was recently sent to us just before last week, about a week and a half ago. Is that the one you're talking about? Was the Washington school stuff still in there? Because I thought he removed. I thought he removed that. So I'll check on that, and we'll make sure of all that. But there's been a ton of changes in the plan,
Okay.
and I guess at this point, in the next few days, I was going to get with the TIF committee and say, where do we go from here? I mean, what's the next step? Because I'm not sure where we go, because I think it's 99% ready to be sent.
Well, might want to double check that one page.
Yeah, so,
So,
okay.
thank you.
Go ahead. First of all, I'd like to start off by thanking the DDA, because a lot of people don't recognize the fact that that's a voluntary group, just like many others in Manistee that has a sole and single purpose of supporting the community and growing the community. So on behalf of the council, I'd like to thank you for, I know, years in some cases of hard, difficult work. It's not easy, obviously, to deal with your businesses and then also deal with all the other aspects that impact the business. I think that the special events are a good example of that. I've been involved, as a volunteer with the special events. I think they're important. I think they add flavor to our community as well as bringing, again, I think all those events have a positive effect. I know that I was involved with bringing back the Labor Day event, and I know that it had a positive impact on the downtown. And I think many of these, if it's not done necessarily by the DDA, but is given encouragement and support, and maybe in some cases a little bit of financial help. Again, a lot of our private organizations in town are pretty small and are not necessarily well financially strapped. And sometimes just helping with some of the fees associated with getting events and some expertise may be a way of keeping some of the things that you would kind of set aside. So that would be one of my expectations, is to kind of work with the community at large, to include the chamber and the Visitors Bureau, and see how some life may be able to be brought back. And perhaps, I know there's some extra dollars in your budget, maybe some event coordination dollars may be spent to kind of bolster some of the events that are happening or can happen in town, and be open to new ones. I know that this has always been a challenge, but one of the issues from somebody who's moved back here is the visual impact of window dressing in our downtown. And that's my politest way of addressing the good, the bad, and the ugly, and a lot of good, and again, I think you have some excellent examples how a vacant building can be window treated to make it aesthetically positive. And you also have some equally good examples of how window treatments can degrade the entire downtown and make people ask, is the city closing? Again, we have two good examples almost right across the street from each other, the good and bad. And I would hope the DDA would kind of work on maybe working with the city and creating some enforceable processes to make sure that we don't continue to just have somebody treat a vacant business or even an operating business without any conscience to their neighbors, so to speak. And then the last thing is you have some dollars set aside for purchasing. And I know at one of the meetings you talked about buying what we lovingly refer to as the art park. And I think that's a great idea. I think that Manistee downtown needs spaces like that for people to kind of be able to congregate. I would suggest that if you ever did get it, we work out a trade with the city and let you have the parking lot across the street, and we'll take the one that you buy, because I think it makes a lot more sense to have a park on the river than a parking lot. But outside of that, I don't have anything else for you.
Nobody else?
No, ready to discuss the budget, though, if that's what you want to, where you
Well,
want to go, since
I
we've already.
have some I don't know if they're expectations or wishes or hopes. I'm trying to figure out over the years what happened with the DDA, because the DDA and council, the city, we're both parties to this. Somehow we've got off in our own little worlds, and I don't know. All I know is as I look at and listen, we share the same common goals. At what point in time can we come together to make those things happen? And when do we stop muddying the water, not muddy, what we do, we muddy the water. We don't seem to wanna move forward. We can't pull the string. When can we pick a project and when can we move forward and when can we make something happen? I don't know. I don't know if it's lack of trust. Somehow we've got to get over this because the only people that lose are the people we're supposed to help. We need to get over this. We need to get by this. How that's gonna happen, maybe with Mr. Taylor being on the board, a lot of that will be resolved. I hope so. As far as the new state law, Mayor Pro Tem talked about a little bit, the transparency. It's all about transparency now. Everything the DDA does has to be on a website. Every receipt, every little thing has to be there. So that's important. And I worry about staying in compliance because if we don't stay in compliance, then we lose our money. So we need to stay in compliance and work hard to do that. I'm just gonna go back to, we have the same goals. When I look at the end of the day, we have the same goals. We need to work together to reach those goals. And I do appreciate your time.
I'll just say thank you for that, for the opportunity to have this discussion. And I can assure you that should we get approval for the candidate at the next city council meeting, one of the top priorities for that individual will be to make sure that the DDA is in compliance with the new laws and requirements. And we are working on expectations right now that'll be approved by our board for that individual so that they have very clear direction on what their priorities are when they get started with the organization. Just as we really did with Tom, we tried to say, these are the things we absolutely need right away, and he's been fantastic at doing that for us. We're gonna follow that same trend with our new employee.
Do you agree that working together for a common goal
Yeah.
is a success for both our parts?
Oh, absolutely. It's the community that suffers if we don't work together, and I don't think anyone has that goal in mind. We all want the community to grow and prosper and be successful, so. And I appreciate all the comments that were made today, because that's helpful to us and can begin more of an open, I think developing more of an open dialogue is also helpful too, so thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move on to the next. Discussion on downtown development, the proposed budget.
I had a few questions. One of them was on the $78,000 for property acquisition. I think this, I'm gonna probably back into this a little bit. You've already purchased the American Cleaners Building. I don't know if there's going to be a cost involved to a brownfield cleanup that you have to do, and I'm just wondering where that is in the budget. Is it in the $78,000 or is it someplace else? I guess I'm directing my question to Tom.
The $78,000 includes, let me see, where is that in the budget?
It's on the second page, property acquisition.
Property acquisition includes demolition of that building.
Oh, it does?
There's an estimate of now, whether that actually takes place or there's something else that happens there, I'm not sure, but in the plan, the DDA board knows that that's kind of an eyesore the way it is, and something needs to happen there, whether it's demolition or another investor comes in and promises to do something quickly rather than just let it sit or whatever. I think that's something the DDA board wants to discuss, and that's part of the money. The other part of the money was possible acquisition of the art park or something like you had mentioned. I know that has been mentioned by a couple DDA board members, Mr. Szymanski, exactly what you just said, that maybe somehow switching that. And I think those are the two items that make up the 78,000.
Okay. And the only other issue that I have is with the payroll and contracted services, $110,000. Now that's been partially, part of that I understand, about 50,000 of it's going to go to the new hire for the DDA director, from what I've read.
The way that's broken down, and there's a lot of estimating going on when
Okay.
that happens, but
Love
that
to hear-
110,000 basically includes about $50,000 for the new employee.
Right.
That's wages and salary and a benefit stipend. And then also, the possibility of a part-time employee or a part-time person to help with things, just day-to-day things, or maybe even, as Mr. Szymanski mentioned, events type of thing, so that your executive director, one thing I've found since I've been here part-time is that you can get tied up in small things every day. And I don't know if you really want an executive director doing some of the things that could be done by someone part-time, a part-time clerical or someone like that, especially during events. I haven't been involved in too many events, but I started right around sleigh bell time, and there was a lot of little things that someone could do at a clerical nature and really help out some of these committees and help out the DDA board and the volunteers. Because I agree 100% with Mr. Szymanski said. When I watch what happens with these DDA board members, how they try to run their businesses, then they chair committees such as Sleigh Bell, and they are still trying to run their business, and they're still trying to make meetings. It's a difficult job, and they're not being paid anything for it. So that's a possibility. So, and then the remaining amount, which is kind of an open-ended, is what to do with economic development.
Well, there's
Whether it's-
$6,000 there, so I want to know how much you estimate would be for part-time and how much would.
Let's see what we put there. I'm not sure. Yeah, see, I have just a combination of salary, fringes, consulting, et cetera. The board has not yet determined how economic development will be structured and at what price. So I initially had a lot less money in there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I met with Barry Lind and I kind of went through the budget a little bit, because there were some things I was unfamiliar with. And we came up with $110,000, which we weren't even sure how much this new employee would be paid at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a real rough estimate. I mean, that money may not ever, all of it may not be spent, or it may go to a consultant, or whatever. I think they're waiting, as I mentioned earlier, they're waiting to see what the plan is from the Rising Tide program, what some recommendations are before they move any further with it.
Oh.
There's nothing specific about that 110,000, other than the first 50,000.
I thought they were waiting for the chamber. And that's always.
Well, the chamber is also on the agenda for the June 12th meeting
Okay.
to make a presentation. So they're still gathering information, and I think it's pretty clear what city council would like, and we'll see where the board goes with that.
If I had my wish list, I would take as much of that 60,000 and put it into a few more events. I think that any events that you can have that are on the street that involve children, we had a couple of pretty good TGIF. I would love to see that continue. I want this to be an inclusive community. That's my personal wish. Other people may disagree, but I want us to appear that way. I want us to be family oriented.
And that may involve having someone work for the DDA board that can assist with some of it.
Right, and that's
And
fine.
I think I came in when a lot of the events were being discussed, but I think that's why the DDA board got rid of some of them. I mean, didn't get rid of them, but said we can't handle them anymore, is because there just wasn't enough time in the day for either the director, they didn't have anybody at the time to even do what I'm doing, let alone help with events. And so I think they came to a decision that they had to do away with some things in order to keep the organization moving forward with some of the other things.
Yeah, one of the reasons I asked for the budget to be tabled and felt, for a work session is because I wanted more clarification on that, but I also wanted to know something about the person you were gonna hire, and I knew we weren't gonna have the meet and greet until after last Tuesday's meeting. So, it was important to me to see her, to meet her, and to find out what her background was. So I appreciate the meet and greet that you provided.
Well, I just might add, I think events have been a very tough decision for the board for exactly some of the same reasons that both Mick and, I'm sorry, Mr.
No, because
But two of the council members have mentioned, I'm not going to take a stab at your last name. I apologize. But it has been our concern for quite a while. In fact, we did do an RFP for that, for someone to handle our outside, in other words, to have our events handled by an outside contractor. And that cost, the lowest bid, was more than we'll be paying our executive director. So which was a big eye-opener for all of us. In other words, to do our event cost us more than the salary of the current position that we're suggesting. So we know that most definitely we would probably have to manage that employee to keep the cost down. So it's not out of the possibilities, but right now we want to make sure that that person's focused on finishing the TIF plan and working through that with this group, and also obviously meeting the state requirements is their primary focus. And then we'll try to do the best we can to address the event issue, because I do think they are important to the community.
I do too, thank you for that.
If I heard Mr. Szymanski correctly, you were suggesting that they could possibly supplement organizations to have events?
Well, that's, again, a lot of times when you have an event, there's startup costs. And sometimes a little seed money may go a long way. If you pick an organization and give them just enough to kind of get it started, they may take the ball and then go forward with some of that. That was just kind of my thought. Again, even things like parades and whatever, all have fees. There's insurance fees and things, and some of that may be looked at where hey, if you put this event on for the DDA, we'll cover your overhead expenses, so to speak, because there's not much money directly into putting an event on River Street except for the traffic. So there's not a lot left over for a private org to recoup their costs.
That's one of the things that I hear a lot is, especially when it came out, we're going to stop some of the events. A lot of people were discouraged by that. So any way we can figure out a way to keep those events, if it's encouraging other organizations to have them, maybe with a little bit of extra help, money-wise, I think that'd be great. Events liven the town up on the weekends. It makes it real fun. Anyway, anybody else?
I think partnering with the chamber, if you get to that point, which that would be, of course, my wish. I think because of their membership, they can possibly help more with these events. So you might think of it that way as a plus.
Is there anybody else? Housing Commission, rental inspection program, Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, this has been an item of discussion at previous meetings. As you know, the Housing Commission does not participate in the city's rental inspection program. And in talking with the director, Clinton, he said it's because they weren't allowed to expend federal funds to participate. So at your desk, I provided you with a letter that was dated April 2nd from a Douglas Gordon from the Detroit field office, reiterating that position that they're not allowed to expend federal funds to pay for our inspection program. And unfortunately, they don't have any funds other than federal funds. However, they do, HUD has a program where the units are inspected on a regular basis. So I'm comfortable they are getting inspected. But it's the point where I just need some direction from council. Do we want to try to keep pushing this, or just say we understand they're not going to be able to participate with us at this time? There is a silver lining. When Clinton was here previously, he talked about going into the new RAD program, if you recall that conversation. At that point, they know, as he says, they are no longer under the public housing regulations of HUD, which means that these units will be fully participating in the city inspections. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. that as they make that transition to the RAD program, they would come under the auspices of our inspection program. So I just need to know, does the council want me to continue pushing or just leave it well enough alone and then wait for the RAD program and when they'll be, they can then expend funds to participate in our program?
I just want an estimate of how soon they would transition to the RAD program, I guess. I'm just curious. I don't think that'll affect my decision.
Clinton's here. I don't know that he has the absolute final answer, but he probably has something closer than I would.
We're in the process of working on phase one, which is the conversion of the scattered sites, the family units. There's 48 units, and the round one application for tax credits is due in October. If we're successful then, and the financing comes all into place, our hope is, sometime in the end of 2021, those units are all done and ready to move into, and we transfer our folks over, and HUD puts different kind of vouchers on them. At that point, they're no longer public housing. So it would be phase one, we would do that. Then we haven't even begun to really scratch the surface of phase two, which is Harborview and Century Terrace. And so I anticipate those units to take much longer in processing and determining, what to be done. But we'll be moving forward with this. My hope is within a total of 10 years, this is all done. So.
Okay.
A couple of questions. Well, first of all, congratulations on your score.
Thank you.
For the housing office. Secondly is, I just want to get my head around some of it because the legalese here. It talks about an example of using non-federal funds would be diverted from a central office cost center. Now, is that dollars coming from like the city, or where would those non-federal dollars come from to? And
Probably about half a dozen, 8 years ago, HUD created that each project, so each building, is to be operated independently and pay for administrative costs from itself. And that's what creates the cost center. However, housing authorities that are 500 units or less were not to be entered into that. We're 215 units. So Doug was throwing out there what is considered non-federal funds is anything goes to a cost center, but we don't have a cost center. We're considered a small public housing authority. So every dollar we have is federalized.
Okay, and the second part that was a little vague for me is that, you have people who are living in private housing. In other words, you provide a voucher and, right? Don't you have managed through vouchers right now at all? Everything is.
We're pure public housing.
Okay. Then
Wasn't there a period of time that the city did inspect those units?
Yes, years ago, what we did was we trained Mark, paid for his training to do the inspection level required by HUD. And then we still have to do 100% inspection every year, but he just chose randomly as he went through what would meet the need. And so we paid for Mark to do 100% every year for us, while he just selected a few and put it under the city's required inspection. And Mark was no longer with the city, and we then had two of our maintenance staff receive training and certification as HUD inspectors, so that we guarantee ourselves that we're inspecting at the level that's required by HUD. And so we have 2 people on staff. And they perform 100%. And I guess the shortest answer is we separated when Mark was no longer, here, when there wasn't anyone in that position doing the inspections.
So Mark was actually employed by you?
Yeah, he was employed by the city, and we had a billable rate that
Okay.
was negotiated that we did for that. But he performed our 100% for us.
So who's doing your 100% now? Is it in-house?
It's internally.
So there's no external inspection of your
Yes, there
property?
is. We just completed,
The one from HUD?
yes, to get the score that you have in
Right.
front of you.
Okay, so that's an external inspection and audit.
Yes.
Is that annual?
It's biannual because we're a small, agency. And the next biannual, they won't do our scattered sites because they're no longer public housing. They're sort of in limbo right now. They did the scattered sites, but the scoring doesn't count because they're considered moving into disposition, so.
And, Mr. Taylor, I got a question to you. In the interim, have we been doing any inspections of the housing?
For the Housing Commission?
Yes.
No.
For several years?
Number of years, yes. Yeah.
So we have no internal capabilities of providing that, or do we?
We contract with the Spicer Group to perform those services,
Okay.
and they do it. Really what it comes down to, like many other things, is money. We can't do it for free. They can't pay us, so we don't do it.
But it would be possible, perhaps, depending on the cost, to do something like a 20% random inspection. In other words, literally just to make sure that we have some kind of a
Right, but
reasonable.
anything's possible, but we have to get reimbursed for it, and they can't reimburse us.
And we are required for reimbursement. We can't do it on a public interest.
Not unless our ordinance requires us to, and our policy requires us to get reimbursed for it, and there's a rate for it. And the thing is, if we do it gratis for one, we're gonna have other people lined up to do it for them.
On your idea, the Housing Commission is a governmental entity in the state of Michigan, very much unlike a private landlord. And because of that, there are cities that have in their ordinance included inspection of the housing authorities' units as public interest because of it being a governmental authority, knowing that they cannot charge for that. So that would be the determination, of council if they desire to amend their ordinance, to provide for that, so.
But we'd still have to pay Spicer, because we're
Correct,
contracting with
yep.
Spicer to do the inspections.
One of the things I've, offered to Thad is, I have to do 100%. And so we go into a unit and our guys are trained, we do a photo log of everything, inspectors that go in and they walk around right, all the way around. Our photos match all that. Everything is recorded in our computer system of what is inspected at a higher level of, we have more inspectable things than what is on the city's chart. No problem sharing that, based on unit number. I have to just redact out of there any tenant information, but, we can share that information too if that's something the city, would like to work out.
We've considered that, and I've talked with Mark Neeson, who's doing the inspections for Spicer Group, and he said they're not the same. It's different. They're looking at different things, so it wouldn't be quite comparable. I mean, and we know they do them. They have them on file, so it's really no benefit for us to have them.
Well, I'm not suggesting going one way or the other, except I know the years that I've been around, this has been kicked down the road numerous times, and it seems to always end up back here with a letter like this, or an explanation like this, so whatever, what's your wish, Council, what do you want to do?
I think the letter is fine now.
Yeah.
There's nothing more we can do.
I just want city manager to make up, to decide what we should do, because I think.
My
he's closer to it.
recommendation would be to keep the status quo with the understanding that we are moving to the RAD program, and that at some point, all of their units will be under our rental inspection umbrella.
Okay,
Okay,
I think we just have to put it to rest. If council's comfortable with that, I'm fine.
I agree. Then get down the road.
Okay.
I've got one separate question. Do you know by chance how many are on the waiting list for public housing?
I don't have that, and I didn't check that before I came here, so I don't have that.
Have like a ballpark or whatever?
Yeah, I know that consistently our request for 2 and 3 bedroom homes is quite long, but I don't know, because we have it broken down by unit size, and then also by elderly, near elderly, and disabled, for the 2 high rises and stuff, so. I'm sorry, I can, I'll make a note of that, and I can get that prepared and send over to Thad. You can
Yeah.
send it out to you guys, because, yeah.
I have one other question, and again, I'm not sure how all of this about the inspection started, but I'm gonna take a wild guess that there may have been a complaint or an issue from a resident that may have started all of this. So my question is, if I am a resident and I'm concerned with my quarters, do I have a process outside of you and your organization to make a complaint, to bring it to somebody's attention if they feel that their quarters are not up to standard, or if there's something that's not being addressed or properly managed?
And they certainly do. They can, there's an 800 number for HUD to the field office. I don't have it memorized, but and there's also www.hud.gov, and then they will point you in the right direction to register, what your issue is in your complaint, and connect with it. And people have done that. And then we receive phone calls, from the folks that work with us in the field office. They constantly change their titles, so I'm not sure where they are right now, but they will call us and say, we have a report on this, can you provide us with this documentation, that documentation, and tell us what's going on, so that, they have a route to do that, and folks have done that.
Do they come up and look over it after they get the report, look at the unit that they're talking about?
They have the right to do that, but they have limitations set on them by Congress on their travel expenses. So
Yep.
they rely on their external inspectors that come out and the pictures that they take, and they compare with the pictures that we have and stuff. So if it's serious enough, they certainly do send, people out. But we haven't had any of that.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, discussion on housing approach. Was that?
Well, good evening. Thank you for having me here. So I will give you a little bit of update on where we're at with the housing initiative as part of Project Rising Tide. And then just to give you some background on the whole project in itself, as we know, housing is one of those bigger issues that we're dealing with, statewide right now. And as much as we would like to, have more developments and things like that, there's only so much we were able to do as part of Project Rising Tide. So within discussions with our housing subcommittee, we thought that one of the things that happens here in Manistee is that the community, because of the lack of understanding and the different housing issues, they either oppose to some of the previous developments that have been here in the past, or even for the lack of understanding of each one of the, workforce, low-income housing, they become a roadblock in developers working in the community. So we thought that a good idea for us as part of the housing initiative would be to, one, raise the awareness with the community, so educate community members and what are the different types of housing, how do they differ from one another, and what does it mean when we say workforce housing or low income or subsidized housing. So as I probably mentioned before, we are working with Sarah Lucas from Housing North. She's the executive director of this newly created organization, and in the past, she used to work in Networks Northwest. I know that she's had her fair amount of interactions here in the community. She's quite knowledgeable of the situation here in Manistee, so I thought it was kind of a good fit that she was the consultant for Rising Tide. So the first part would be that, and then in the whole community forum, Sarah Lucas was here the first week of May, and she was able to conduct interviews with some community members and some commissioners, realtors, and some just community members about the housing issue. I had a conversation today with her, and she's planning to be around also next week to try to talk to some other community members and get some feedback from the community about the housing and, you know, how can we do or how can we build useful content whenever we do this housing forum. We have a tentative date of June 26th for the housing forum here in Manistee.
Did you repeat that? I didn't hear you.
June 26th.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I will obviously come to council too and give you all of the details of that event. She had, according to the last meeting we had, she received interesting feedback from the people that she met with of how much housing is obviously affecting the organizations and employers here, but also the lack of workforce housing or accessible housing, affordable housing for community members. So that is part number one. Then part number two, we'll discuss the idea of connecting the city of Manistee to housing projects of housing incentives or just any housing program offered by the state. Housing North is a newly created organization, so basically everything they have right now is fresh. They are in tune with the newest housing programs, and as far as we talked, she is expecting to do a July Rising Tide work group meeting with the city of Manistee, providing some, you know, insights and specifics as to what can the city go after when it comes to different housing programs. Another thing I did with Claire Carter from Beckett and Rader, and this was the first week of May, we presented to the Planning Commission a memo offering some recommendations in the planning ordinances to the city of Manistee that will probably allow to make it a little bit more attractive to developers that are interested in investing here in the community. I have copies of the memo here. I am not a planner, but if you do have specific questions, I can happily write them down and make sure I get the responses to you. But within the recommendations, Beckett and Rader suggested that we look at, or at least we brought up to the Planning Commission for additional feedback, amending the ordinances to using permits by rights on the accessory dwelling units. She also talked about removing discretionary standards in the planning ordinances because the vague language sometimes can also become an opposition for developers here in the community. We talked about the minimum dwelling size to allow for more creative housing options here in Manistee. Some of the feedback we received from the Planning Commission was to kind of prioritize some of the suggestions that we were bringing up in the memo to kind of focus on the low-hanging fruits that will allow for easier housing investments here in the community. And then the third part of all of this too, I asked Sarah Lucas about how can we do developer outreach. I know that the chamber and the city participated together in doing some developer outreach. I think it was a year or two ago, and I've been part of some of the meetings of interested developers that have come to the community as a result of those. So we're planning to do some developer outreach. She recently met with the Hollanders to kind of look back at some of the lessons learned from previous projects that haven't gone through at the city of Manistee, kind of looking at lessons learned and how can we make sure we educate developers to make sure they're ready whenever they're coming in front of council. So far, within the things we have going on Thursday, May 30th, we will have a work group meeting with the housing subcommittee to make sure we get the appropriate feedback and ideas on how can we get the right content to the community when we do the housing forum on June 26th. And then June 26th will be the community housing forum, and then for July, we are hoping to wrap up this initiative, trying to do a report that will have community partner recommendations, resource recommendations, as much as connecting the city of Manistee to state resources for housing, and then development opportunities, and not so much of a target market analysis, but at least key development projects that will be a little bit, faster to pursue in the community to get us some housing solutions. So unless you have any questions for me?
We get our tax bills pretty soon for summer taxes, right? Haven't we traditionally put a letter in the summer tax bills saying what the city is up to or highlights about the city?
We put something in there. It's usually a 2-pager,
Would it be inappropriate to put something about this public forum?
depending on when we are going to be mailing those, make sure it's timely.
I think a lot of people might be interested in, particularly the what did you call them, the accessory dwellings? I keep thinking of most granny pads, but, I like the idea of doing that. I mean, Frankfurt does a lot of that, and a lot of other communities do it too, so.
And she brought some useful recommendations. I was actually, one of the things that was impressive to me was that when the city of Manistee got certified for the redevelopment ready certification, obviously the planning ordinances were revised, and I was really impressed with the things that Beckett and Rader was able to come up with to kind of make housing a bit more of a viable option here for developers in Manistee. So I have a copy of the memo. I will be happy to share it with you just for your records. And then as we work with the planning commission, obviously, we'll have the priority or the key recommendations to bring up to you before any changes made.
That also, I sat in on the incentives 101. I thought that was well done, and I thought there was probably 30, 40 people here. Right? It was a pretty good crowd, and I'm just curious if you got any feedback from the audience.
I did. So usually you notice that whenever I do an event, we try to have a sign-up sheet. So what I do is kind of get, with the people names that I haven't recognized before to get their feedback and kind of get their insight. People were very interested in the programs, especially because now the CRP grant from MEDC raised to a 50% of your project. So that is kind of a big deal for some people. I was talking to Mr. Taylor about the interest of at least 2 people that have told me that they are interested in pursuing projects moving forward. So it looks pretty good. I guess that out of that session, getting 2 projects will be something pretty promising, but we'll know more as the days go by.
Okay. Is that something you could share with the DDA? Because it's a downtown development issue. So any of that feedback, if you could share with the DDA.
Yeah, and the DDA knows I try to be very receptive and kind of a resource for everyone, and I've kind of put myself out there too. I try to be as communicative as I can, and also having the DDA participate in the steering committee meetings makes a difference, because then there's a DDA representative kind of voicing out anything I got going on as part of Rising Tide with the board, and then I just go to all their meetings to kind of build up in any question or doubt there is about the program or the joint participation or collaboration, so.
Anybody else? You have anything other, Mr. Taylor?
Just wanted to note that before Steve Payne left tonight, he handed in his Act 198 application.
Oh, it's quick.
So he came prepared. So that'll be back in front of council in a future meeting.
Great.
Any other questions for me?
Great job, Seth.
Oh, thank you. We should be hearing, there's a lot of organizations waiting for Joe. So the Chamber is obviously waiting on Joe Borgstrom. The DDA is also kind of waiting on Joe Borgstrom. We had a little of a conversation because we were talking about how broad is this strategy going to be. We did talk about focusing in specific smaller projects that the city will have the capacity to actually work with. Last we spoke, it's supposed to be before the end of May. Or by the end of May, so if that changes, I'll be sure to either let you know through Mr. Taylor or just update you whenever we have the opportunity to chat. And then the same with the branding too. And with the branding, everyone will hear from me to see how can we take advantage of the new image for the city of Manistee to help kind of revitalize a little bit of our looks right now and attract younger people, so, or more people in general, so.
One other thing on the Project Rising Tide, Lizette pulled some strings, and all the Project Rising Tide fellows are going to be here in Manistee for 2 days in the middle of June for a training. We're going to host them. We got a lot of great ideas. My goal is that when they leave, they're all going to shake their head and wonder why they didn't apply to be here in Manistee. So
That's the expectation, yeah.
we've got, I think, with Lizette's help, we've got a good couple of days planned for them.
Anything else? Thank you, Lizette.
Thank you.
Nothing else? I want to thank everybody who came and spoke. I want to thank the DDA. Let's continue to communicate and work together, and we will be successful, I have no doubt. What are you adjourned?
All right, here we go.
Look,
You can have that in case you need
okay,
a reference.
that'd be great, thank you. It's a lot of information. How did you break it? Or how did she get into it?
I don't know, she won't tell me.
Yeah, we'll have to work on a resolution
I've been to it.
for the Steve Payne's application.
Yes. Hi.
But we've got a template because they did one back in '95.
Drive in that.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I've got a copy of that. I'll talk with George and see if there's any other little things. So,
All right.
shouldn't be a big thing. Oh, man.